Hello everyone, it's Reverend Laura here, and I'm going to tell you a story today from the Bible. Now, I wonder, would you feel nervous about speaking to a really important person, maybe like the Queen or even the Prime Minister? Well, today's story is about a really important person, and his name is Naaman, and he was the commander of a whole army. But the story is also about a little servant girl. And she wasn't important at all. In fact, we don't even know her name. But she was used in a really special way. And we're going to find out now. So let's open the book to the Bible and a story called The Helpful Servant. Naaman was a soldier. Not just any soldier, but the commander of the whole Syrian army. He was a very powerful man. But he was afraid. Naaman, you see, was ill, and no one knew how to make him well. His skin was covered in sores, and he couldn't feel his fingers or his feet. Everyone felt sorry for him, and God felt sorry too. So God whispered to a little girl who had been captured by Naaman's army and carried away from God's promised land. She worked for Naaman's wife, and one day she said to her mistress, "Back in Israel, where I come from, there lives a man called Elisha. God uses him to make sick people well. If only Naaman would go and see him." And before long, the great soldier who had fought against God's people was off to seek help from God's prophet. But Naaman didn't go alone. He took his servants and his horses and a chariot full of treasure to reward Elisha in case his cure should work. It was a grand parade, and Naaman expected a grand greeting in return. But when he sent one of his men to knock on Elisha's door, the prophet didn't even answer. Instead, he told his servant Gehazi to say, "If you want to be well, go and dip yourself 7 times in the Jordan River." Now, it may be that Naaman was tired and frustrated, or maybe it was simply that he was proud. Whatever the reason, the prophet's message made him angry. "The Jordan River?" he shouted. "It's filthy! I'll throw myself in a river back in Syria, but I will not stick one toe in the Jordan or take the advice of a man who cannot even be bothered to meet me." "Begging your pardon, sir," mumbled one of Naaman's servants, "but if the prophet had sent you off to do something hard, you would have gone straight away, wouldn't you?" "Of course," grunted Naaman. "Any soldier would." "Well then, why can't you go and do something easy, like washing in the river? It can't hurt, and it just might work." Naaman sighed. All right, and he led his men to the river. He dipped himself twice. Nothing. He dunked himself twice more. His skin was as ugly as ever. Twice more, and still no cure. Naaman was getting angry again. But when he came up for the 7th time, spluttering and shaking water from his face, Naaman's men let out a cheer. Naaman opened his eyes and looked at his hands. The sores were gone from all over his body. Naaman dressed and hurried back to Elisha's house. The prophet himself answered the door this time, and Naaman could not contain his joy. "Take the treasure, take it all," Naaman begged, "for you have saved my life." But Elisha said no, for it was God, after all, who had helped Naaman. "All right then," said Naaman, scooping up a pile of earth. "Let me take this with me, so that I can stand on a piece of your land and worship your God too." Elisha nodded and smiled. And God smiled too. For, with a little girl and a muddy river, he had turned an enemy into a friend. Who do you think was really the most important person in that story? I think it was that little servant girl. Because without her, Naaman would never have known about Elisha, and he would never have known about Elisha's God. So she was very important after all. Now, would you like to close your eyes and think about the people who help you when you are unwell? It might be doctors and nurses, but it might be your family and friends. Say a silent thank you to them now. Now I'm going to say a prayer, and if you'd like to make it your prayer too, why don't you say Amen at the end after me? Dear God, thank you for using a little girl to help Naaman get better. Please be with anyone we know who is ill today and help them get better too. Amen. Now, next week, I hope to be with you again to read another story, and I'm hoping that some of the rest of the Open the Book team will be with me too. So we'll see you then. Bye-bye.